Oh boy, do I have a lot to talk about. More specifically, I want to talk about the newly updated talents and tier set for the 11.2 patch. I've already made a few videos going over my first impressions of the talents alongside the tier bonuses, but in this video, I want to talk specifically about the testing that I've done and how the class is actually shaping up. At the time of recording this, Mythic Dungeons have not been made available for testing, so everything I talk about in this video is based on early PTR testing, basically on training dummies, and maybe a few normal instances. So let's take a walk. Something Blizzard is doing in the next patch is centering our tier sets around hero talents, which I applaud them for trying. My theory is that if they end up being actually kind of good and liked by the community, they may try to incorporate them into an extended version of the hero talent trees in the upcoming expansion, Midnight. At first glance, the Master of Harmony tier set seems to be very underwhelming compared to the Shado-pan. Naturally, I did want to test the strength of the set, especially when it comes to the 2 versus the 4. The 2 set interacts actually with vitality gains, which happens every time you deal damage or you heal. Whenever you gain vitality, you have a small chance to empower your next Tiger Palm, which will trigger the buff called Harmonic Surge. This ability will deal a set amount of nature damage to your target and surrounding enemies, and at the same time, it's also going to heal a few nearby allies. The 4 set bonus, though, greatly empowers this ability by giving you control. Whenever you cast Celestial Brew, you're going to automatically gain 2 charges of this Harmonic Surge buff. So I did have a few questions. First, how impactful was the 2 set as a standalone bonus? So I spent a long time hitting the training dummies. After multiple 10-minute sessions or so of dealing damage but not hitting Celestial Brew at all, it seemed to only deal about 1.5 to 2% of my total damage, and would proc every roughly 30 to 40 seconds. Of course, this could be conditional by being at training dummies compared to being in a real environment like Mythic Plus or Raid, where you're going to be also gaining additional vitality by healing, or even Celestial Fortune. The percentage of this damage is also based on the fact that I was hitting 4 training dummies compared to only hitting 1, so the percentage overall, I guess, could be skewed a little bit. But I guess at face value, this 2 set bonus seems incredibly weaker than its Shado-pan counterpart, which I'm going to get to in a bit. But the real juice of this set bonus comes from the formulaic rotation of the Master of Harmony Brewmaster. This tier set seamlessly integrates itself with how Master of Harmony executes its rotation by gaining vitality and then dumping it by pressing Celestial Brew. Once you gain the 4 set bonus, Harmonic Surge tends to deal nearly 6% of your overall damage, at least in this kind of give or take AoE situation. The feedback loop on this is actually great, because once the Celestial Brew is absorbed and you return to gaining vitality, the remaining Harmonic Surge damage you deal will contribute to vitality gains, ultimately making each Celestial Brew deal more damage through vitality. This is just phenomenal. Another question I did have, though, was more of a concern with stacks overlapping. Let's say you proc Harmonic Surge right before you press Celestial Brew, or I guess vice versa. Would it overwrite your current procs, leading to a damage loss? Luckily, it does not. I don't know what the cap is for this buff, but you can at least go up to 6, which means that you can Celestial Brew back to back, and then cast Black Ox Brew to cast Celestial Brew again, allowing Tiger Palm to be a great source of burst damage. Now, obviously this isn't practical, but at least you don't need to worry about stacks getting munched because of unlucky procs. And I definitely recognize you'll never Celestial Brew back to back in any scenario realistically, so I just wanted to test how many stacks it would actually go up to. On top of all of this, we've seen the introduction of a competing Celestial Brew talent node with the talent Celestial Infusion. I wanted to know if this would actually work with the tier set, because it's not uncommon to see bugs early on PTR cycles like this, but surprisingly, it works. You can run either of the 2 talents and still proc the tier bonus. Lastly, I wanted to confirm that Harmonic Surge didn't contribute to overwhelming force. I had a feeling it wouldn't, and shouldn't, but I just wanted to make sure, since it is expelled by casting Tiger Palm, and fortunately, and or I guess maybe unfortunately, it doesn't. The reason I say unfortunately is that overwhelming force during Season 2 was actually a fairly solid portion of our overall damage due to the Season 2 Luck of the Draw tier set. This means that Blackout Kick losing out on those juicy damage gains from the loss of the 2 set means that overwhelming force will ultimately be slightly weaker and a smaller percentage of your damage compared to Season 2. Overall, though, I really like this set. It's controlled and has a great feedback loop with the Master of Harmony playstyle. It's hard to tell right now which will perform better in single target or AoE, but I do think that the set does tend to bolster Master of Harmony's single target, since the damage does end up splitting among all nearby targets, not to mention the potential raid healing it can do to nearby allies. Honestly, 10 out of 10 Blizzard, good job on this tier set. Moving on to Shado-pan, This tier set's busted. Unlike the Master of Harmony tier set, which complements the hero talent, the Shado-pan tier set puts all of its eggs into one basket. And some players may see this as a good or bad thing. Now, what I mean by that is it's going to put basically most of your damage just into flurry strikes, which I think is awesome. So as for me, this tier set is busted and I love it. So the tier set does a couple of things. First, it straight up causes Flurry Strikes to deal 30% more damage. On top of that, when you activate Weapons of Order, it'll instantly give you 10 Flurry Strike charges, which honestly is a buff you never think about. And it'll cause your next ability to proc Flurry Strikes, independent of your current Flurry Strike procs. This, compared to Master of Harmony tier set, is so much stronger in my opinion, at a face value of a 2-set to 2-set. And this, by the way, I want to mention is a true Flurry Strike proc. And since it grants those 10 stacks automatically, it means that you're instantly going to get a Wisdom of the Wall buff whenever this does proc. And it's also going to grant you Against All Odds, which is a buff that grants you agility based on the amount of charges spent, which always is 10. Over the course of the expansion so far, most players would only ever gain 10 stacks of this buff, which grants 10% agility for a few seconds. I always found this annoying because the tooltip has always read stacks up to 20. And now for the first time, we can truly achieve the 20% agility gain and attempt to maintain it under specific conditions. This is made even better with the 4-set bonus. This bonus doubles our Flurry Charge generation, which again, honestly doesn't really matter since your Flurry Strike proc alone will essentially cap you at 10 stacks for your next Flurry Strike. But the true meat of this bonus really comes down to the additional effect, which causes your Flurry Strikes to proc every 120 energy spent instead of the 240, meaning you get double the amount of procs inside of your Weapons of Order cooldown window. Obviously, there are some underlying talent implications with this tier set. First, Chi Surge as a talent almost feels required now at this point, since the set is revolving around Weapons of Order. This means we want to maximize our cooldown uptime. Luckily, Shado-pan already has natural CDR baked into its, build with efficient training. Because you will want to spend energy quickly, Black Axe Brew will also probably be mandatory for maximum DPS output. Most players do run this talent anyways, but Bob and Weave is and always has been a solid alternative for players who want defensive value from a talent but don't like the additional button bloat and the cooldown of Black Axe Brew. Beyond that, Blackout combo can then be utilized for additional brew recovery to get Black Axe Brew off of cooldown and synced with Weapons of Order windows, and of course Facepalm now being changed will now consistently reduce your brew cooldown as well, creating a nice feedback loop of spend energy to reduce the cooldown of your brews, which refunds Keg Smash charges through Weapons of Order, and energy in the form of Black Ox Brew. That was a lot, but I do have a few questions about this set, and I did some testing. First, what happens if you're above 120 energy spent already, and then you use Weapons of Order? So one would assume that it would immediately proc Flurry Strikes since you're above the 120 required, but unfortunately it's just not the case. Instead, it's going to trigger on your next energy spent. This means that Brewmaster players will ideally not want to hit their Weapons of Order cooldown unless they are between 0 and 119 energy spent. Which got me thinking, can Flurry Strikes overlap and proc at the same time? Can I proc multiple of them at once for ultimate Flurry Strike damage? The idea around this is basically getting the free proc when you hit Weapons of Order and being near 240 energy instead, so it counts twice because you're at 240 instead of 120. What I found was quite interesting. One of these conditions were true, that the free proc of Flurry Strikes by entering the cooldown did not override your naturally occurring Flurry Strikes, meaning that you could proc 2 at the same time by sending the cooldown while near 120 or 240 energy, and spending energy that as both the conditional for energy consumption and the 2-set bonus by requiring a cast. But sadly, you cannot proc 3 at the same time. It doesn't matter if you're near 120 or 240. Essentially, if you're over 120 during Weapons of Order, it's going to proc Flurry Strikes, and it's not gonna do some weird shit when you're at 240. This simply means that there are a few conditionals when you're considering sending the cooldown Weapons of Order. You do want to be between 0 and 119 energy spent, and ideally have some type of Black Ox Brew either available or nearly available to maximize the amount of Flurry Strikes within that cooldown window. I can definitely ramble on about this for a long time and talk about the different energy and cooldown optimizations you will need to make, but I'm going to save that actually for another video. I'll do a full damage guide once the patch is closer to launching and some of the bugs that we found have been fixed. The best and worst part about this is that the player can get all 4 Wisdom of the Wall buffs at the same time for a short period of time. Unfortunately, you can low roll and not get a Shadow proc, for example, or you'll have overriding buffs. And so essentially you'll end up just refreshing one another, but we can worry about that issue later. When it comes to how this tier set interacts with the hero talent and class, I simply I love it. This is exactly how I imagined this hero talent would actually be played since beta testing. I was always confused why Against All Odds could never actually achieve 20 stacks like the tooltip promised or indicated, and Wisdom of the Wall always felt like it was meant to have multiple different applications up at the same time, allowing for different defensive and offensive buffs at all times. I hate to admit this, but I can see Blizzard nerfing this tier set or tuning down the numbers on Flurry Strikes in some capacity. The tier set is still fairly RNG, and Flurry Strike still has some bugs when it comes to recognizing targets that are in range or new enemies that are entering combat. I'm eagerly waiting to see what Blizzard ends up doing here, but I have to say this as of now, both tier sets are amazing and they feel so good to play with. Unfortunately, I have to bring some bad news. I've seen this question crop up actually a lot, and I figured I would just mention it here. Press the Advantage is dead. I was an avid enjoyer of this talent back in Dragonflight. I thought it was a great option for players who preferred a more passive, less button bloaty style of Brewmaster. It was also a great alternative for players who just don't really enjoy the ramping nature of Weapons of Order. Sadly, Blizzard made the mistake, whether it was intended or not, of killing this talent with the hero talent trees. Playing this talent is a massive DPS loss in many ways. From being energy starved without playing Rushing Jade Wind, to having almost no synergy with either of the hero talents. Master of Harmony causes Tiger Palm to deal AoE damage, and is now the trigger condition for the new tier set in this next season, which you completely miss out on by playing PTA. For Shado-pan, it's a similar fate. You completely miss out on the efficient training cooldown reduction you get, and you're removing an energy spender from your kit, meaning you're probably going to be doing less damage. It doesn't increase the damage of your auto attacks either. And then of course you have the new tier set with Shado-pan, which requires Weapons of Order to proc it. It does not proc off Press the Advantage. I hate to say it, but this talent is basically unplayable. But it seems like Blizzard are clearly trying to move away from it, or I guess the devs might have just forgot it exists entirely. I would love to see a world where Press the Advantage is playable, but it does require a lot of dedication from the dev team. And you know how they feel about Brewmaster players. If you want to hear my opinions on how they could revitalize this talent, leave a comment saying something like, I like that. Actually, fuck it. I'm going to leave a pinned comment, and if that gets 50 likes, I'll do a video about it. Onwards to the rest of the testing. While a lot of people are saying the Ox talent adjustments are terrible and don't necessarily constitute as a rework, I do want to talk about the pros of these talents, which include the Black Ox cooldown, the 2-point node, and the new CC node with the improved Niuzao and Mighty Stomp cast. So I am aware that the pathing on these nodes pretty much sucks, but the current tuning on these nodes are actually quite good. While Niuzao still remains a 3-minute cooldown and no longer benefits from any kind of cooldown reduction within the class, it does provide the Brewmaster a solid defensive. The issue with the Black Ox on live servers today is that the last rework to the cooldown back in 11.1 increased the amount of damage that the cow absorbs, but that created a new problem. In high content or difficult content, so high keys essentially, it would take enough damage to where you would die before even lasting for the entire duration, and of course in raid you never took enough damage for the thing to actually do damage. The most recent update coming in 11.2 allows for purified damage of the Brewmaster to actually heal the cow, allowing it to last its entire duration. This naturally made the cooldown stronger and more reliable, but also benefited another talent called Call to Arms. This talent now provides additional power to the Weapons of Order cooldown, which is pretty cool. Moving past Niuzao himself though, we now have a completely reworked node, Walk with the Ox. In previous iterations, this talent simply provided cooldown reduction to the otherwise underwhelming Black Ox cooldown and slightly increased stomp damage. Stomp damage hasn't been good since Shadowlands, so most players have been ignoring this talent completely. This talent, reworked, is essentially just a random damage proc event that is triggered on all of your damaging abilities. The damage itself isn't anything substantial in a vacuum, but does provide a great overall damage increase completely passively. It tends to proc roughly every 10 to 12 seconds with 1 point spent on the node, and if you slam a second point, it just basically doubles the proc rate, or I guess reduces the internal cooldown, and has no effect on the damage being dealt. So with both points slotted, it's going to proc roughly every 5 to 6 seconds, which seems to indicate an internal cooldown, which I will talk about more shortly. Lastly, the improved Niuzao node was reworked in such a way where it now only provides an additional form of CC in the form of a knock-up. At first, one might think a tank getting increased CC capabilities could be a good thing, but the CC is simply just a knock-up, I guess. This will prevent some casts, but essentially shares a cooldown with the Black Ox, since it can only be cast once. That means this knock is a 3-minute cooldown. The real kicker is that it doesn't even deal any damage, which means it pretty much provides nearly zero benefit. One redeeming factor of this is it does also work with the Call to Arms summoning of Niuzao, allowing the Brewmaster to use Mighty Stomp during the short 12-second window of this mini cooldown. This means that Shado-pan, with their natural cooldown reduction of Weapons of Order, accompanied with things like Chi Surge, means the Brewmaster can actually have a semi-reliable shorter cooldown on this knock ability. Still, I don't think this node is all that great in its current state, but I believe Blizzard could provide a simple solution. Make Mighty Stomp either deal a pretty substantial amount of burst damage, or make it like a 10-second cooldown while the Ox is active. This gives you roughly 3 to 4 knocks during your major 3-minute cooldown, and 1 to 2 knocks every Weapons of Order cycle. Alternatively, they could just give Mighty Stomp like 2 charges per use if Blizzard feels like 3 to 4 knocks is too much. This may all seem pretty powerful, but Brewmasters have been down bad for a while, and this additional CC or damage could be exactly what Brewmasters actually need. Circling back really quick to Walk with the Ox, I just want to talk about my testing of this talent in conjunction with Rushing Jade Wind. Once I began testing Walk with the Ox, I noticed that it procced quite often and was semi-reminiscent of the old talent Resonant Fists back from Dragonflight, which actually dealt crazy damage on hit, which made talents like Rushing Jade Wind almost mandatory. The thing with Rushing Jade Wind is that it's an applied maintenance aura that players want to maintain as much as they can, with a theoretical optimized uptime of 96 to 100%. What's interesting about this ability, though, is actually how quickly it deals damage, which is roughly every like 0.7 seconds. My original thought was that by using this ability, it'll increase the amount that we proc Walk with the Ox, making it stronger than its special delivery counterpart. But after spending a considerable amount of time using Rushing Jade Wind versus not, there was no significant difference between opting to use Rushing Jade Wind, since there seems to be a true internal cooldown tied to the proc, versus not. Now, over the course of several minutes of combat time or even an entire key, the additional fast-paced damage of Rushing Jade Wind may squeeze out a few extra procs, but I want to wait until actual dungeon testing to confirm or deny that Rushing Jade Wind actually increases its damage by a significant margin where it's going to force you to play it. Rushing Jade Wind has been the bane of multiple Brewmasters' existence, from what I can tell. Most Brewmasters just enjoy when they can opt out of the ability instead of being forced to play it for maximum damage. On live servers, the total damage difference is actually quite small between the two choices on that node, so for players who want to play Rushing Jade Wind, definitely can. While I'm personally an enjoyer of the talent, most people don't like how maintenance heavy the class becomes when you have to play with it. It also slows down the pacing of energy spending when playing Shado-pan, which hurts Flurry Strike proc rates, and Master of Harmony would rather allocate globals to larger vitality gains than spending time on maintaining the buff. Ultimately, you can play Rushing Jade Wind if you wish, but it doesn't really benefit you in a significant way at this current time. All in all, I will take a look at this talent node again when dungeon testing becomes available. Last but not least, let's talk about Niuzao's Resolve. This talent was added in the latest 11.2 build on the PTR as a part of the Brewmaster rework, I'm air quoting here, and causes your Gift of the Ox Orbs to instead heal you over time, and its healing is increased by up to 80% based on your missing health. Sadly, this is the first major bug that I'm going to kind of talk about and that I've come across, and I'm sure several other super handsome, extremely intelligent Brewmaster players have also discovered. This talent is simply not scaling based on the amount of orbs you have. So whether you have 1 Gift of the Ox Orbs or 5, it's healing for the same amount, which means that it's actively a massive HPS loss if you talent into this at the current moment. I hope that they fix this in the near future, hopefully before dungeon testing. It also doesn't seem to be all that intuitive by nature. You would imagine that it would like dynamically update or have multiple private auras that indicate an overlap in healing to allow you to have multiple applications of the hot that will scale based on when those individual timers expire. What I mean by that is it seems that if you expel harm or absorb an Ox Orb while you have a hot on you already, it'll refresh based on the new conditions, which could have a negative impact. Let's say you have 5 orbs and you're at 20% health, and then you expel harm to consume those orbs to apply the heal over time effect of Niuzao's Resolve. And with the additional healing, you find yourself at 80% health naturally after a few, 6 seconds or so. And then let's say you expel harm again and you only have 1 stack. That healing is currently getting overwritten, so you lose out on the portion of that hot that you would have normally had. Now, this won't be a problem for most players who track these types of things because you generally won't be trying to consume them within that kind of 6-second cooldown recovery you have on expel harm. But I think for the average player, this could have some huge issues just based on simply even from just like movement. You can accidentally walk through an orb, refresh the hot, and it kind of fucks everything up. Now, I will admit it's hard to tell because a lot of this is theoretical because A, I'm not able to test it in dungeon environments at the moment, and B, it's currently not registering stacks at the moment and just simply applies a flat hot that scales on missing health. On paper, this talent can be extremely strong, but until Blizzard fixes it, I'm really not impressed at all. A quick little call to action: if you have access to PTR and want Brewmaster to shine, you should log in and go and report this ability by opening up your talents, hovering over Niuzao's Resolve, and hitting your F6 key. This will send in or open up a bug report page, which you can type in something like not scaling with amount of Ox Orbs or something along those lines. Besides that, that just about covers my week 1 update. Now for some of you keen viewers, you will notice that I didn't really talk much about Celestial Infusion. I purposely left it out because I don't think anything I can do in-game currently will properly reflect how this actually will operate or work or play out. If you're curious, the new talent does last for 16 seconds instead of 8, and provides you with a 20% damage reduction instead while the shield persists, instead of the full absorb amount that you would normally get from Celestial Brew. Now, I do have some concerns about this shield, but I'm going to save that for a separate video entirely, along with some other defensive things like Zen State, and hopefully a bug fix Niuzao's resolve. So for the time being, Monk does look very fun next season, and I'm eager to test out the new tier sets in the new dungeons. Of course, leave any and all questions down below, and I'll try to cover them in the next update in about a week or so. Massive shout out to all my Patreon supporters who allow me to make content like this. Thanks again for watching, and I'll catch you all in the next one. Peace.